Erik Slater of Clutch Points is here to discuss the Nets season so far, what it's been like with and without Durant, what the trade deadline could hold, and of course, everyone's favorite topic, what to make of Ben Simmons' performance this season. We're going to get into it all. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Doug Norrie here without Adam Armbrecht, but that's okay because we have much improved. We're getting a huge upgrade here. Erik Slater of Clutch Points, host of the Believe in Nets podcast, one of the premier really voices that's come along in the Nets world, covering the team, is here to talk about Brooklyn and everything we've seen so far this season and what's to come. Erik, how's it going, man?
It's good, man. I appreciate you having me on. Always good to talk some Nets with a fellow podcast, fellow coverage of the team. So appreciate the opportunity.
If you are not following Erik, it's an absolute must at Erik Slater on Twitter. He's also just absolutely cranking out content for Clutch Points, multiple pieces a day. You're really not going to see this kind of volume. It's very high usage in the content world from Erik. So it's Kyrie Irving with Durant off the court style usage for when it comes to Erik cranking out content. Like I said, you can also check out the Believe in Nets podcast. All these links will be in the show notes. And like I said, over on Twitter, just go follow on Twitter. Erik is absolutely excellent in putting together clips and just threads around what he's seeing in the games. And I'm going to try to have him get out of here so that he can get to Nets practice. Before we get into anything else, just what are you hearing on Kevin Durant right now? I think the latest word I saw from you and some other people was that we were going to get a status update sometime on Tuesday, but obviously the operative piece for all Nets fans right now is sort of what the status is for Kevin Durant.
Yeah, so Jacques Vaughn hasn't said anything. He's said that, I'm where you guys are, waiting for an update on Tuesday. I mean, I'm sure he's heard something, but they're practicing today, Tuesday, around 12:30. We should get an update there at practice. So by the time listeners are listening to this, we'll probably have some news on where he's at in his recovery. And that timetable that they said was going to be, Woj said no more than a month, and this is 2 weeks. So it's going to be somewhere from 2 to 4 weeks, it looks like. And that kind of leads us right up to the All-Star break. I think the All-Star break would have been like 5 weeks out from his injury. So it's really going to be the question of whether they want to bring him back before that All-Star break, whether they want to just give him that extended bridge and, get him an extra 2 weeks of rest, really. So we'll have some info on that today, probably coming in about an hour and a half.
This podcast is going to go up as soon as possible. So this should be up on Tuesday. So by the time you hear it, there's some chance there's already been some more clarity around the Kevin Durant situation. As someone that's covering the team, about as close as you can get when it comes to just practices, games, and everything, and really just taking a look at everything from a low level to a very high level. What have you seen from the team? What have you been sort of just umbrella-like thoughts around this team without Kevin Durant over these last few games? It feels like an absolute roller coaster. But has it been what you expected? Has it been better, worse? What have you seen from the Nets since KD went down with the injury?
Well, it's interesting because it's been what I expected, and then it hasn't been what I expected in a sense, because what you would have expected is that they get the game against, OKC. They get the game against San Antonio. Obviously, there's some variables in there because Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving missed those ones respectively. But then they beat a Utah team that's no slouch this season, and then they go into Golden State and they win when Golden State's they were 17-5 at home coming into that one. So, you didn't expect that. But what I did expect coming into this, and I said it right when KD got hurt, is that this isn't the team from last year. And obviously, with them dropping 4 straight, there were the comparisons immediately to the downward spiral when they went 5-16. They lost 11 straight, and KD later said that derailed the Nets season in his eyes. So, there were obviously that narrative was going to be run with. But when you look at this team, first of all, they have a full-time Kyrie Irving, which is the biggest thing. They don't have a James Harden who's halfway in, and they swapped out guys like Kessler, Edwards, DeAndre Bembry, LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin, Patty Mills. They brought in guys like Ben Simmons, Joe Harris, Royce O'Neal, Yuta Watanabe, TJ Warren. So it's just a much improved team in terms of depth. They have a full-time Kyrie Irving, and I think that this team has a lot more belief and a lot more resolve in where they're going and their ability to survive the Durant absence. And I think that was evident in a game, especially like Sunday against the defending champs.
Yeah, for sure. We were dying laughing because we looked back at the season last year when Katie got injured and the starting lineup for that first game was Harden and Kyrie. And you're like, that's cool. And then after that, it was Patty Mills, Kessler Edwards, and Day'Ron Sharpe. You're like, what the hell was going on? Right. It's like very easy to forget just the sort of like 180 U-turn this team has taken just in terms of personnel. When it comes to Kyrie specifically right. So this is Kyrie, no Harden, and Kyrie full-time. In this stretch without Durant, where it's been sort of up and down, but the last like 3 games, if you start with like the fourth quarter with Phoenix and then going on into like the next 2 games, he's looked as good as really like anybody in the NBA, frankly. I mean, definitely statistically. What are your thoughts? I don't think like the top end version of this team includes Kyrie as the best player, so I don't think that's really a question, but is Kyrie, in your mind, the kind of guy that can like carry a team for long stretches? Like, what we've seen from him over the last 2.25 games, let's say, sustainable for you when it comes to, because they kind of need that, right? Like to be able to really tread water or even not tread water, like excel. Do you think that this kind of play from Kyrie is sustainable?
Well, going off of just what you said about that starting 5 quickly in that first game of the Durant absence last year, I mean, in one of my first articles, I wrote that. You're talking about they were filling out their rotation last year with 5 or 6 guys towards, the bottom half of the rotation who aren't even in NBA rotations this season. So It's just a night and day difference. I mean, they were leaning heavily on guys like Patty Mills, who they're not even in the rotation this year. But to your question about Kyrie Irving, I would have a very hard time saying that he can, carry a team as a number 1 option for an extended stretch. If we're talking about like 15 to 20 games, I think that that's a lot to ask just because of the nature of how he's, producing offensively in terms of just his shot profile. I mean, he's a tough shot maker and he's done it his whole career. And I don't doubt that he can do it. But when you're leaning on that for, an extended stretch of 15 to 20 games, I think that's very difficult. But what has been encouraging, and I, talked about it at length in my podcast last night, is the way he's done it these last couple of games is it was a little bit more of like kind of a Herculean effort against Utah with 48 points. But then, against Golden State on Sunday, he put up 38, but it's not like he was forcing his shots. He wasn't just, he talked about it post-game with that quote that everyone saw about first option, it doesn't matter to me. And he's not forcing his shots. He's making the right play. He has moments where he's, aggressive and says, I should be the one taking the shot. But he's making the right play. He's passing within the flow of the offense. He's getting other guys their touches early. And I think that showed late in the game against Golden State because you have guys like Joe Harris, like Seth Curry, like Royce O'Neal hitting shots because Kyrie earlier in the game was getting them the ball in the spots that they should and getting them involved. And to be able to do that and also put up 38 points on 12 of 22 shooting, I mean, that's very impressive and that's very encouraging because the last couple games, against Utah and Golden State, we're seeing it's 48 and 38 points, but it's also, 9 assists, 7 assists, 11 rebounds, 9 rebounds. We saw him locking up Steph Curry on a few possessions in that game. So he's doing it all. This is the best all-around basketball these last couple of games, two-way basketball that I've seen Kyrie Irving play as a net. And I can say that pretty confidently because he's doing it in so many other ways other than just scoring.
Yeah, just getting 38 points on 22 shots. I mean, like that is not, that alone shows you that it's just not a complete hero effort. It's just like super efficient. But
we've seen Kyrie do that. I mean, I think the Charlotte game last season comes to mind. But I think he might, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he set some kind of record for shot attempts getting to a certain point total. And, he's an efficient shot maker. Him and Kevin Durant, the Nets, a lot of critics coming into, before Durant's injury have said the Nets are shooting at a mid-range clip that is just insane. It's historic. So those were the critics. But I mean, that's what Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving do. So, I mean, it's tough to, over an extended stretch to do that with just one of them, I think, but they've shown they can do it in the past for sure.
All right. Want to get into more with Erik here, specifically around Ben Simmons. We're going to do that next. But first, going to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is now the official betting partner of the Locked On Network. FanDuel, look, you know these guys. FanDuel has been keeping it locked down for years and years now. On this side of it, they have the NFL playoffs here. And obviously, we're excited to just announce this new sports betting partner with Locked On because they're the number one sports book in America. You go to FanDuel right now. New customers can join today to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed. You have to place your first $5 bet to get in on that action, and you have to sign up at FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel is all your favorite bets from the money line, the point spreads, the player props, coming up with NFL action this weekend. You can even combine bets for a chance at a bigger payout. That's the same game parlay. Head on over to FanDuel right now. I got to tell you, right, you're hearing this first. This is Tuesday morning. San Francisco going into the Eagles plus 2.5. We're a little too, the Giants game, a little too front of mind for when it comes to the Eagles. Maybe the 49ers, it didn't look as clean and crisp as you wanted. That's okay. 49ers plus 2.5 over at FanDuel right now. It's all in the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Ben Simmons time. So if you I really encourage you, if you haven't, I mentioned at the top, but I'm just going to say it again because it's like sort of part and parcel of what we've been talking about here, is that if you have to follow Erik on Twitter, right, at Erik Slater. Erik does really good video breakdowns. I don't know. Do you do it for every game? I'll get into this one second, but
not every game, but when I see something that I thought
okay.
stands out, like that Ben Simmons stretch against San Antonio, a lot of the times lately, I'd like to, when they're in these close games, I'd like to kind of do down the stretch and just kind of, highlight some of the swing plays. But not every game, but a lot, maybe every other.
Okay, so it's worth it to go try to find this. I'll post actually the link for this also. Erik's done a great thread about, like, I'm going to call it the passivity, the passiveness of Ben Simmons in the offense when it comes to just when he's like the primary ball handler. For those that haven't seen this, walk us through sort of like what tuned you into wanting to look at this specifically, and like what your overall feelings around Simmons are when it comes to running the offense, because I thought some of your takes were really good, eye-opening, and like a little troubling. Sounds like it's probably, I don't know, has more gravity than it really does in the real world, but like from a basketball perspective, maybe somewhat troubling around sort of how he's playing right now in the offense.
Yeah, so it really started for me in Chicago. I noticed it when they had that game where Kevin Durant and Seth Curry went off, but the support, like Royce O'Neal had the 0 for 8 from 3 game in that loss, and the rest of the supporting cast was like 2 for 21 from 3. Like nobody was hitting shots, and the Nets just desperately needed somebody to create. And Ben Simmons, didn't do anything. He didn't take a shot in the fourth quarter. And I said after that game that, throughout that historic stretch where the Nets were, whatever it was, 18-2 over their last 20, Kyrie and KD they were going off. It was an insane performance from the two of them. So Ben Simmons was kind of allowed to fade into the background a little bit after he had a really good 6-game stretch in late November where he was averaging like 15.2 points, 82% shooting. He was taking 8.5 shots per game. And that was really what you wanted to see. And then KD, he went out with that calf strain. He missed 3 games. And then KD and Kyrie start going off, and he kind of starts fading into the background. And I said that at the game after the game against Chicago. And then KD goes down, after a game later. And I said, Ben Simmons, if you look at his stats, fourth quarters of games, he's taking 0.6 shots per game in the fourth quarter. He's really not a guy who's producing anything. And at points with KD out, you're going to need that because they're not going to have guys who are proven, who have done it down the stretch late in games. And he's supposed to be your second best player. So that kind of led to that game in San Antonio where he was aggressive early. And we've seen him come out aggressive to start games in the first 6 minutes. And then down the stretch of the fourth quarter, it's just like every time he gets the ball, when he has an opening, whether it has an advantage, he's immediately looking to get rid of it. He's not looking towards the basket. And it's kind of it's making some passes just kind of not telegraphing, but just kind of making passes to make passes. They're not really effective. It's just kind of walking through the pace of the offense. And I think you saw that in the fourth quarter against San Antonio is where I made that clip thread that you're talking about, where he had a lot of plays where he had advantages, he had openings, and he's passing the guys like Cam Thomas out on the 3-point line. Then I said it against the game against Utah. It's kind of alarming when you have a guy like Ben Simmons, who's supposed to be the caliber of player that he is. And, we're not expecting him to be all-star Ben Simmons, but at least a high-end level starter. How often he's handing the ball off to guys like Royce O'Neal or Edmund Sumner. Like, that shouldn't be the way that this offense is being run all the time, where they're running DHOs and Chicago sets for Royce O'Neal coming off. Royce O'Neal isn't a ball handler. Ben Simmons is supposed to be a ball handler. So I just think it's a little concerning. And I think that period with KD and Kyrie, obviously you'll take it 10 times out of 10 because it got the Nets to where they are in terms of their record, but it allowed Ben Simmons to fade a little bit in terms of his offensive aggressiveness. And I think you're seeing kind of the results of that now with him just not being comfortable. The bottom line with Simmons right now is when he's trying to get his own shot, when he's trying to create for himself, he just looks very uncomfortable and he doesn't look like he has a feel or a rhythm in those spots. And I think that's why you're seeing him try it a lot less, along with him also probably not wanting to go to the free throw line. He's shooting a career low 43% from the line this year. So I think all
look, it doesn't take a basketball, like you don't have to have been watching basketball your whole life to know that this doesn't really look good. Like it doesn't, or okay, comfortable is probably the better word to put it. Like even where there's been times I think, and I saw someone post this the other day and I just really feel bad because I actually don't remember who it was, but it was like, even when he creates advantages, he undoes the advantage, right? Like, so he'll get someone into the lane and he'll be able to, you would think, just go up above him. And then he kind of stops, pivots, and then throws up like this little sort of soft baby hook. And you're like, just go absolutely, go to the basket. This doesn't make sense. And when you posted the Spurs clip, it was really eye-opening in terms of body language, because you can see it at times, especially when it's slowed down, where his body doesn't even face the basket. And when you don't even face the basket, it means you are not even you're not even considering this move, right? And so when it comes into these default passes, like, and we've seen it multiple ways, right? We've seen it where he faces his body away and then he throws a pass, to like where you said, to Cam Thomas, Royce O'Neal. He'll do the other one where he gets the ball and it's like an absolute game of hot potato. It's like the ball's a ticking time bomb and he just has to get out of his hand before the teacher calls the game's over, and he's standing with it because it happens so fast. The usage rate is in the toilet. It's like at 14% on the season. And the final piece that it's like really troubling to me is that if you look at his points per touch this season are like the second lowest in the league, behind only Draymond Green, right? So Draymond Green's the only other guy points per touch. Now, that's fine. You're like, okay, Draymond's elite defender. You want Simmons to be the Draymond in this offense, except that this doesn't actually account for dribbles and like time of possession either. Like the Draymond thing, that stat's even a little wonky. So because Simmons actually controls the ball. Do you think that, like, is there a world where you see this turning around? And this is a two-part question. Is there a world where you see it turning around? And does it have to turn around for the Nets to like reach the highest end of their upside, right? Like, so I think it's for me, it's like two sort of combined questions.
Okay. So the first thing, is there a world where, I think it's difficult to say whether or not we're going to see Ben reach the guy that he was maybe in that 2019-20 season in Philly, where, we saw they put up the stats during the Nets broadcast now. Their game, he scored 42 points in some of those games back then. He was over 30. I mean,
it seems like a different world.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to say. And I mean, I'm not going to act like Ben Simmons was ever just like a score first guy. But now, if Ben Simmons scored 42 points in a game, you would literally think that we fast forward like a year and a half and we might be in like an alternate dimension. Yeah. Because him scoring 10 right now is like, oh my God, Ben Simmons reached double digits. But I think the biggest thing for this turning around is, I think a lot of people, Ben gets a lot of hate, and he's obviously, and I understand it because you are paying him $33 million, but I also think that that's a little bit of a difficult take because, he didn't play last season. He's not a $33 million player right now, regardless. So when I see people say we're paying this guy max money, I get it, but he's not. But where I counter to that is he's also not a low end, role player, which is what he looks like at times. So it needs to be more towards the middle of that. And for me, I think a large part of this is just his athleticism, because he does not look like the same guy physically. I mean, I posted a clip earlier in the season. It was just a mix of some of his dunks from his last healthy year. I mean, this is a guy whose head was above the rim and was just posterizing people and, putting back dunks. Like even when Ben, puts down an alley-oop or he puts down a putback, it's still like, it kind of still looks like a struggle. You know what I mean? Like, it's like he's hitting the rim and it's like his head's not like at the rim or above the rim. It like just looks like it's a lot more difficult for him to elevate. And I think that when we talk about him not being comfortable in creating his own shot, that goes into it because he's a smooth guy and he had moves and he had stuff in his bag, whether it's Euros or other things that he used back in the day. But a big part of it was, I'm going to get downhill, I'm going to body you, and I'm going to finish over you at the rim. And he can't do that right now. So it's a lot more difficult for him. And I think that he will turn a corner and get a little bit better. I actually wrote an article earlier in the season. There are a lot of guys who have had, not a lot, but a decent amount, who have had the same surgery that Ben had. It's called a microdiscectomy. And they really just go in and they clean up a bulging disc to get it off your nerve. Like Michael Porter Jr. is the one that everybody's heard. He's talked about the recovery from it. And the jump in efficiency and what they see people do the second season after that surgery, studies have found is fairly significant. So I'm going to expect him to get better physically, which will go a long way. But then what's difficult for it is with Ben, there's also just a mental aspect of it that we saw at the end of his last season with Philly, that those things are kind of tied in. So it's like you can't ignore both, but it's not just physical and it's not just mental. Like it goes hand in hand. So I think he can turn it around and turn a corner and get better, especially because we saw him do it this year. But I also think, like you said, the question was, are the Nets, do they need that for them to reach their highest ceiling? I'd say yes. Do they need him to be an all-star, like the level he was at to win a championship? I don't think so, depending on whether or not they make another move and bring another piece in at the deadline. Would be my answer there.
Okay, let's wrap this up. You just mentioned the deadline. I think that's the thing that is probably most on the forefront of Nets fans' minds here when it comes to if or will the team make a move leading to the trade deadline. The Kevin Durant injury maybe muddies this up a little bit because his timeline for maybe returning is right around where the trade deadline is, and there's some timing issues here. But do you see the Nets making any moves? Is their powder dry enough to like be able to make anything of significance here? Like, do the other guys that have value? I know I'm kind of asking this on a high level, but the easy question here is, do you see the Nets making a move at the deadline, the trade deadline? And do you think they have enough to make it something that could actually be, a needle mover for the team overall?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I think they're going to make a move. I would be extremely surprised if they didn't make a move. The next question I would say is that a move where they're acquiring a 6th or 7th rotation piece, or is that a move where they're acquiring like a 3rd or 4th caliber, 3rd or 4th rotation guy? We got a report from Woj, I think a week or two ago, right after the Kevin Durant injury, and he said the Nets are going to be active at the deadline and they're looking for help, particularly in the front court. And if you're getting a report from a guy like Woj on that, who we know has ties to the Nets front office, they're going to be aggressive. And I do think they have enough. They have the 2 first-round picks they can deal that should be attractive, given that if you're the Nets team and you're dealing your 2027 or 2028 first, and you got a Kevin Durant who's 34 years old, I mean, that's an attractive pick. The protections they would put on that pick, that's something else to be said later. But then they have Joe Harris, Seth Curry, Cam Thomas, and Day'Ron Sharper, young guys, even maybe Kessler Edwards if somebody's interested. So I do think they're going to make a move. I think it would be in the front court because I got time. We don't have to cut this off short, but something that I was saying was, on my podcast is we saw them go to Golden State, went to Hack-a-Clacks, right? And he shot 5-16 from the line. We talked about Ben Simmons' free throw issues. That's a preview of what you're going to get come playoff time with these guys. So if you want to have Claxton and, right now, if the Nets want to be adequate in terms of size, defense, rebounding, it's best when they have Claxton and Simmons on the floor. And when these guys are struggling shooting free throws like that, they can't do that. It's going to be difficult to have one of them let alone both of them on the floor down the stretch of a playoff game. So I think that really comes to the point where they need another guy who has a little bit of size, who can add some rebounding, some defense, and also just isn't a liability in terms of free throw shooting. They need that piece for the end of playoff games. And, you've heard a lot of people float Kyle Kuzma. Sounds like with the Wizards trading Ryu Hachimura that they're trying to keep him. I believe them, but I also have heard that Kuz, from reports of other people, that Kuz doesn't want to be there after the season. So I don't know what to make of that. You got guys like, Jeremy Grant's another guy with Portland, kind of not imploding, but just way behind where they hope they'd be, him potentially. So those are kind of the needle movers. And then I think you have mid-level guys who maybe don't move that needle, but they at least offer you another option to throw into that front court besides one of those two who can't shoot free throws right now in a playoff game.
Yeah, it's so hard with the Nets because on the one hand, I totally agree with you on some of these guys, that those would be some needle movers. The Nets are a weird fit in some ways because it's hard to bring in a guy who needs the ball to extract the most value out of them because, if you're like sort of high usage, not like Grant or Kuzma are necessarily high. I mean, Roy definitely probably is, but like the guys that like kind of need the shot in order to be the best version of themselves is going to be such a hard fit with a team that already has Kyrie Irving and KD, right? Because at that point you kind of need to be a full role player. And though you need to be able to probably do just enough on the offensive end also. And then all of a sudden, like the player pool starts getting pretty constricted because that, those other guys you mentioned are going to cost something, right? Like the Grants and Kuzmas of the world are not going to come free. The other guys are going to be probably more of the flyer type. And I mean, I don't even know like Jared Vanderbilt. I'm just trying to think of like where these other sort of like role players exist. People have mentioned Naz Reid. Like I don't know. Are these like really the answers for the Nets? It's really hard to tell. But would you agree with that? Like it feels like it puts them in a very tricky spot.
Yeah.
With actually who is valuable for the team because if you want to take 15 shots a game, be on the Nets.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the difficult thing with maybe guys like a guy like Kuzma, you don't know because he has been able to go to Washington and, expand his shot profile a lot, which I think makes him more attractive to the Nets just because he can score. He can like put a little rim pressure. He can get to the rim. The Nets get to the rim at the lowest rate in the league. You see people always complaining like we get a terrible whistle. We don't go to the Nets don't go to the basket. So it's like they're not going to get foul calls as much. But as a guy like Kuzma comfortable with that, we heard, Jeremy Grant, when he was with Denver, he wasn't happy. That's why he went to Detroit. He wanted a bigger role. He wanted more shots. Now he's with Portland. He's not winning for whatever it is, the third consecutive year. Would he be happy? I mean, if you force the issue and you make a trade for a guy, whether he's happy or not is you want him to be happy, obviously, but he would be there at that point. I think the biggest thing for the Nets is it would be nice for them to get a front court piece like Kuzma or Grant would be, ideal because they're guys that they have enough size, Kuzma 6'10", Grant 6'8", that if you wanted to play them as kind of a small ball five and lean into offense completely, you're still going to be undersized and you're really going to struggle on the glass, but you at least, it's not like egregious. They have the size. So, and they have the shooting and they can put a little bit of rim pressure, which is what the Nets really need. So those two guys, I think, would really be the best return that you could be hoping for from the Nets.
And also with just that, they can probably switch too. And that's the other the other thing that sometimes people want to bring in these big lumbering guys is that like, hey, good luck switching with some of these guys.
Yeah,
right?
That's my not even the switching, but like you brought up Jared Vanderbilt, and I've seen like I forgot who, I think it was Bobby Marks or somebody floated him as a trade idea for the Nets, and it's kind of tough with him because he's shooting like a decent percentage on threes this year, but he's doing it on like 1.7 attempts per game. He's not a real spacer. And we already have two guys in the front court in Simmons and Claxton who aren't, they're not spacers. And we see the issues that might present down the stretch of games. So to bring in a third guy and give up assets for him that presents those same issues, it's just a little bit more of a logjam. The difference would be if he can shoot free throws. I think that's where the Nets would consider it. Like, to bring in another name, John Collins, a guy that the Nets have had interest in. I don't like Collins' fit just because his three-point shot's not great. I don't think that he's not really great switching onto wings or ball handlers on the perimeter, which the Nets do a lot. But He does have the size. He does rebound. He does at least present a 3-point threat, and he can shoot free throws, unlike Simmons or Claxton. So I think that's why that's where a lot of the Nets' interest is coming from. It's not, it's the theory of maybe if we put Collins into this system, his 3-point shot's going to improve with some more open looks, and he can shoot those free throws that Simmons and Claxton can't down the stretch. I think people undervalue how important that is right now. Like, that's a necessity. This team needs that, because in playoff games, you can't be losing 1 or 2 playoff games in a series because you have 2 front court pieces that are getting played off the floor because they can't make free throws. Like, that's extremely important at the deadline for this team to pick up a piece that kind of can at least solve or mitigate that issue a little bit.
We talked about it a ton, man. You're right. We're right on the same page with that. Like, it's easy to kind of gloss over now, and then you get, we'd mentioned, like, what's going to stop these guys from winning? And we've said it multiple times, is that free throw piece. And then you kind of forget about it, and then you get a reminder in the Golden State game. It's like, oh, right, this is what everyone's going to do
against a playoff caliber coach like Steve Kerr. Like, there's going to be coaches who, when you get down the stretch of this game, if the Nets are cooking offensively, if the Nets have a little bit of momentum, there's going to be no reason not to go to that, because, you see, if the Nets have some momentum, they're trying to make a run where you're down 10, you cut it to 4, and then you put Nick Claxton or Simmons at the free throw line and they miss 2. That's just a momentum killer. And I know Jacque Vaughn's not going to want to get bullied and have guys played off the floor, but you need at least an option to counter that, which the Nets don't have right now. They don't have a big man who can shoot free throws. And, how many playoff teams can you say that about, where they don't have a single big man who can shoot free throws? It's really tough to win that way.
It's like Shaq or something. And then you
get
you have Shaq.
Yeah. And respect to Nick Claxton and Ben Simmons, Nick Claxton's having a breakout year, most improved defensive player of the year type year. He's not Shaq. So we know those free throw issues there's still a problem.
All right, you heard it here first. Erik Slater, Nick Claxton, not Shaq. So that's the big takeaway. All right, we're gonna let Erik get out of here. He's got to get to Nets practice. Really appreciate it, Erik. Go to Clutch Points. Multiple articles a day from Erik going up there about everything in Nets world. Follow him on Twitter at Erik Slater. Check out the Believe in Nets podcast. All those links will be in the show notes here. Erik, keep holding it down, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Always love following the pod. You guys do great work. So looking forward to hearing more of it throughout the season.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Be good.
See ya.